A Mighty Wind, The Annals of History, by Lord Blackwater.
Chapter 17. A Return to Familiar Haunts. The four companions rode on the back of one of the giant lady eagles of Jubnar. After leaving the Tree of Beelzebub, they had used Imp 3 as a sacrifice, along with the staff of Wiggling Wieners, to summon the bird. They were now well on their way to Longville, and to whatever Shartner had in store for them. The eagle they rode upon was special, not just because it came from the ass of the great Jubnar, but because it also possessed the heaviest boobs in all of Cumbria. Hearing them slap together was like hearing thunder deep in your soul. Legend had it that after Carl had created Cumbria, it was the Lady Eagles who flew down and carved out the rivers and valleys using their breasts.
"Why haven't we been riding these everywhere, Barnaby?" Keldorf asked in annoyance. "I could have done with missing out on all the cumwebs and sea monster shits."
It was hard for Barnaby to hear exactly what Keldorf had said over the thunderous claps of the eagle's boobs, but he tried to answer as best he could to what he thought the question was.
"Would you ask Nara to splash a little of her dairy-free milk onto your porridge, or would you accept the delicious milk of her teat instead? Think through your questions before you ask them, Keldorf,"
Barnaby replied with annoyance. There was some truth to what Barnaby had said. The eagles rarely ventured out into the larger domains of Cumbria. After all, they were at the mercy of Jubnar, and Jubnar alone. He would decide when they would be expelled from his asshole and when they would be sucked back up. All they could do was ask for the ride, hoping it would be granted. But with the help of the Lady Eagle, they would be in Longville in no time.
"When we get to the village, I need you to follow my lead,"
Barnaby yelled back at his three companions.
"Dell gave me a parting gift, and I think we can use it against Shartner, but I'll need your magic, Keldorf, and your titty juice, Nara."
Both of them nodded in agreement. Barnaby paused a moment before turning around to talk directly to Trinity.
"Most importantly, Daddy is going to need your sadistic creativity, Trinity."
She smiled back at him and curled up under his arm, giving him the strongest hug she could muster.
"Nothing has ever felt more like home,"
Barnaby thought to himself as they flew off towards Longville on their giant-tittied birds. Barnaby continued to hold Trinity in his arms as he looked down on Longville. The ride with the eagles had been loud but much appreciated, and now they found themselves standing on a ledge overlooking the village. As Barnaby looked down, he couldn't help but feel the same way he had 5 years ago when he had first left and returned with Nalra and Phelan. He was nervous of what he would find in Longville, but this is where reports had put Shartner, so he had no choice. It seemed fitting that Shartner would meet him here in the end, but this time was different. This time he held Trinity in his arms. He had a daughter now. He had a family. This time, no amount of shit or menstrual rags the villagers threw at him could take those things away.
"Daddy, what's a polished door handle? I heard Mummy asking you for one repeatedly last night,"
Trinity asked innocently. Barnaby chuckled to himself.
"It's what true love is all about, Trinity. I'll tell you about it when you're older."
Nora put her arm around Barnaby, and Keldorf joined as well. Barnaby had something to fight for now, and this time they had a plan for Shartner. The four of them walked through the streets of Longville. It was eerily quiet. Barnaby had half expected the town to be out and forced to throw turds at him. But before they could wonder too much, Barnaby had noticed the town square up ahead. A crowd of people surrounded the square's steps, and at the top stood Shartner. As the group approached the square, the villagers parted to make way for them. Like a lubed-up dick sliding into a vagina tickled by some solid foreplay, they slid right to the front. Once they got to the stairs, they noticed that Shartner was now wearing her Proud Boy's jacket. Barnaby shook his head.
"Welcome, my old friends,"
Shartner greeted them.
"It's good to see you, and how lovely that all my other Proud Boys came out to greet you too." "Leave it, you tosser. You've clearly become emotionally constipated, and these people are following you blindly. They don't know what evil you stand for, and I'm not sure you do either. They are only here for the gold, the women, and the drink.
Barnaby replied.
Oh, we are all here for so much more, Barnaby. We are all here to make sure your ass is ripped and torn.
Shartner replied angrily. The crowd began chanting.
The rip
began the tearing. The rip began the tearing. Shartner looked out and was obviously reeling at how quickly she'd been able to turn the whole of Longville on Barnaby. Trinity began throwing the tall man at any villager she made eye contact with. She was becoming viciously protective of her father.
Now is the time for the three of you to choose. Join me and the Proud Boys, or die.
Shartner said flatly.
We have too much respect for ourselves to join such a hateful group.
Nalra hissed, spitting at Shartner's feet.
I don't trust any dragon with a dick bigger than 2 feet,
Added Keldorf.
Trinity give you a polished doorknob.
Trinity said, clearly unaware of the meaning of her attempted insult. Everyone turned to Barnaby and waited on his response.
I only make decisions when I've eaten or when my bowls are empty, and I haven't eaten in over a day.
As Barnaby said this, he whipped out Stephen and began to cream all over Shartner. It was like the bakery had made too much sweet cream for their krumkaka and had decided to squirt it out freely into the streets. Nalra stared wide-eyed at the amount of cream that he was producing. When he was done, he wiped Stephen's lips with a rag and looked Shartner in the eyes, or at least what he could see of her eyes, for the cream was still thick.
Looks like my balls are empty now,
Barnaby said.
I've decided to kick your arse, Shartner.
That was the signal for the other two,
Magoosh!
cried Keldorf, casting a spell on Barnaby's ass. Barnaby sneezed and pulled the log of black water from his rear. Using his queef, he lunged at Shartner. As he made his way toward the dragon, Nalra shot titty juice from her uniboob at villagers who began crowding the group, trying to stop the attack. Meanwhile, Trinity began kicking shins and punching the dicks of anyone who came close to her. It was a true team effort. Barnaby smashed the log across Shartner's face and felt a crunch. Shartner fell to the ground with an audible thud. The left side of her face had just about caved in on itself. The crowd stopped and stared. Everyone sat in silence, almost in shock of what had just happened, with the exception of Trinity, who continued her mini-campaign of rage.
It couldn't have been that easy,
Barnaby said to himself, standing over Shartner in disbelief.
It isn't,
The voice called to him. It had been a few days since he'd heard the voice, but it remained familiar.
He's not down for good, Barnaby.
The voice hadn't lied. In that moment, tiny creatures began coming out of Shartner's ass. The creatures appeared to have Shartner's face
The spice melange, the spice melange, the spice melange.
over and over. As they moved, they sprinkled some sort of dust over any cuts or wounds. When the dust settled, Shartner's bones began cracking back into place. Scales repositioned themselves, and the blood on the ground began pouring back into Shartner's body. Shartner rose and stood menacingly in front of Barnaby.
Is that all the cream you can muster, Barnaby?
Shartner asked, with fury in her eyes.